What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by one of my favorite DodgerHeads guests, Lance Brozdowski, a guy that dives into all sorts of stuff on the pitching side. Most of his time is spent covering the Cubs, but if you follow his Substack at all, he covers Major League Baseball pitching as a whole. So, Lance, how are you? How's 2024 treating you?
It's been great, man. Pretty electric season so far. So it's been a lot of fun. I watch a lot of Dodger games too, because that's West Coast. So I usually get out from Cub games that I work, and I throw that on my phone on my commute home. So I'm tapped into what you guys are doing. You're a fun team.
Well, and I imagine for somebody that follows the game through the lens that you do and at the level that you do, the Dodgers have to be one of the more interesting teams where you could just flip on any random game and there's probably some sort of starter with something to pay attention to or some scrap heap reliever that has been converted and trying something different. Like, I imagine of all the teams, this isn't a terrible one to flip on at the end of the night.
Not at all. No, I agree. And I mean, they carry so much gravitas in terms of what they do on the pitching side that whenever I see a small adjustment, like, it gets me thinking as to why. You give them some benefit of the doubt. Like, they're not just doing stuff randomly. Like, a lot of the stuff I think they do there is very deliberate. So whenever I see a small tweak, I'm like wondering why. And like, is it the team? Is it matchup based? Is it an overall change they see? So it's easier to do that than with a team that's maybe not as strong on the pitch development side, because then it's like, why are they doing this? The pitchers decide to do it, so it's easier with the Dodgers to kind of introspect.
Well, let's dive in. Most recently, Yoshinobu Yamamoto gives the Dodgers 8 solid innings the other night. It is against the Marlins. We can put the caveat out there that it is the Marlins. But I'm curious, in Chicago, you're covering Shota Imanaga, another pitcher that came over from Japan, a guy who's had unbelievable success early on. Yamamoto, if you take away that one random Korea start, has a 1.76 ERA over his last 7. Before we dive into kind of some of the minutia, I'm curious, just as a guy who's watching Imanaga and then from afar watching Yamamoto, what are your overall impressions on the Dodgers starter?
Yeah, Yamamoto's been pretty interesting. I'd say they're very different pitchers overall. Like, Imanaga's doing it with 2 pitches, and I think he has probably close to one of the more unicorn fastballs in baseball, especially from his slot. Like, you could say, like, Tyler Rogers is a unicorn fastball, but that's like because he throws weird. Like, Imanaga doesn't really have an odd release in any way. It's just smaller, shorter than average because he's a small guy. But Yamamoto seems to be a guy that's mixing more. He's one of those guys that you think that four seam should be elevated, which we can get into, just based on the principles of, like, generally that flatter approach is going to work at the top of the zone. But I think there's a lot of thoughts going around the league. I actually talked to Michael King of the Padres this morning. I was in their clubhouse, and he and I were chatting about fastball location and the fact that, like, his is now moved down away as well. We talked about it in terms of just wanting to give hitters different looks. Like, you get really predictable with elevated four seam. So I was trying to galaxy brand it when I saw Yamamoto fastballs primarily down, and I was like, okay, like, I wonder if they're just doing this because they like how it sets up things on the outer third, sets up the curveball splitter, etc. And then he was elevating some late in the count, and now we see him go to a sinker, and it's like, okay, like, now that's more inside, and the four seam seems to be climbing a little bit. I read a piece from Fabian Ardaya from The Athletic who talked about them wanting to kind of like slow roll some of this, let him adjust to the ball and keep his MPB location. He was still pretty good with that. So this, to me, seems like a guy who's just going to uptick as the season goes on, which I think at the end of the day is probably what the Dodgers want. Like, I don't think they really care about his April stats and May stats. Like, they want that guy there in October. And if it's all a slow build such that he peaks in October, where the usage is exactly where they want it then I think the mission is accomplished.
Yeah. When I was reading your stuff, you mentioned the sinker that sort of just popped up. There's also a slider that in the last few weeks has kind of popped up. I guess from the outside, as somebody who's never really thought super deeply about pitch mix, it seems odd to me that 7 starts into his time in Major League Baseball, he's like, yeah, I'm just going to try and throw a slider. And I believe it's the slider that you said he kind of doesn't really have a feel for yet. He's just sort of throwing it, and a lot of them aren't really competitive. So talk me through, why would a guy like Yamamoto, who's experienced incredible amounts of success in Japan, who the Dodgers paid incredible amounts of money to sign with them, and now within a month or two, they're adding 2 pitches to his repertoire?
It's a great question. I think it's something that I imagine agents. This was funny. I actually had another conversation this morning with a player who was talking about another team forcing him to add a pitch. And his agent was like, the dude's got a 0 ERA. What are we doing here? And like the pitcher was kind of bummed, and he kind of felt some things after he started adding that pitch. And it's one of those things where I think teams are so forward looking that to them, it probably doesn't really matter too much what the guy has done. Like they're trying to make the guy a good major league pitcher and make their team have a higher probability of winning. And if they think they could do that through adjusting pitches, adding a slider, adding a sinker, and optimizing the repertoire and the usage, then they're going to do it. Like, I don't really think that it's like, this guy was good, let's just let him roll. It's like a team like the Dodgers probably knows the tweaks to make to get a guy to stay ahead of where the league might be going against him. And we saw that, early. Like, I mean, he's a sub-2 ERA since I think that first start over in Korea and stuff. So it's like, it's just a matter of time, I felt, with Yamamoto before they unleashed some other things. And I mean, looking at it from the nerd data side as well, there was just some obvious things going on. Like the four seam was getting beat over the middle of the plate. And I was like, if you want to keep that location, you got to have the guys respect inner third. So it's like, just add a sinker and throw it inner third, and the guy can't dive out over the four seam. So I think even if he keeps the fastball location down away and elevates with 2 strikes, I think adding the sinker, putting that inside, will make the four seam that's down away better from just a visual and game planning standpoint. And then the slider, you mentioned, like, I charted those pitches. I thought like 8 of them were misses, slight misses or non-competitive. And then he dotted 1 yesterday. But I mean, I wonder also, like, he threw all of those sliders ahead in the count. I think maybe half of them with 2 strikes. I wonder, honestly, whether they were trying things out against a team that they just thought was weaker in situations where they knew, like, hitters weren't going to be as aggressive. So they were just like, we're going to beat the Marlins. Like, just this is your day to play around with those 2-strike pitches and do it in counts where you have leverage such that we're not getting other guys just swinging away. Don't do it behind the count. Like, give me the sinker, give me the slider. When you're ahead, when we don't think there's a lot of damage on them, just get a feel for in-game execution, which is really hard oftentimes to replicate in bullpens and such. So I like thinking the galaxy brain angle on the Dodgers every now and then. And I haven't talked to anybody in the org on this, but I'm pretty confident they were like, the Marlins aren't good. Let's just play around in the start, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, if you throw a ball here, we don't really care because you have a couple pitches to play with. And so, hey, throw one here. Yeah, I don't think it's coincidence, like you said, if every single one of them is coming like with 2 strikes or ahead in the count. But I want to go back. Something you said, I was reading something on social media, and it was talking about Andrew Bailey, who's now the Red Sox pitching coach, and how, like, there was this quote about, like, well, his approach is just like finding out what guys' best pitches are and just doing that, and somebody retweeted, like, you would think this is super obvious, but you'd be amazed at how many teams don't do this. And it's just interesting because on one hand, as somebody who follows the Dodgers most closely, there's almost I almost trust Mark Pryor to say, yeah, you might think this is your best thing, but maybe not. And so I just can only imagine being in those rooms and in those conversations with a guy like Yamamoto, who's looking and being like, you realize I won like the NPB Cy Young 3 times in a row, and you're trying to introduce these pitches to me. And yet the Dodgers of all teams probably have earned the equity to be able to say those kind of things, I'm guessing.
You're spot on. I mean, I think player buy-in is huge. It's a huge part of this puzzle. Like, there's elements of certain teams where you go to that team and I think as a player, you almost expect to get better. And the Dodgers are one of those organizations. There's a couple others out there as well. When you go to maybe another organization that hasn't had the pedigree of adjusting players, like, I get it if you're a player going in there and the Athletics are like, you should change this. And you're like, should I actually change this? And you talk to your old coaches, the coaches you trust more from a prior org, maybe they'll let you go. And you're like, do you actually think I should do this? Like, I just think when you go to the Dodgers, you expect to get better. I just think it helps with adjustments to get that buy-in. You saw with Brazier last year and some other guys with like immediate tweaks where it's just like they probably knew they had an issue. The Dodgers were really easily able to implement a fix for that issue, and then the guy got better. And when they do that continually year after year, like, guys are aware of that, Like, guys know when they come from other orgs that they're going to get better if they just listen to what the Dodgers want them to do. And I really think that holds weight.
Yeah. And I imagine for a guy like Yamamoto, Glasnow, who we're going to talk about in a second, it also helps when these guys have long-term contracts. They're not asking a guy to do this who's like, well, if this doesn't work, I'm going to cost myself millions of dollars. It's either guys like a Ryan Brazier, who's recently been DFA'd and doesn't exactly have a long line of suitors that are willing to take the as-is version of Ryan Brazier, or it's a guy who says, well, you're paying me $150 million over the next 5 years. So, like, if you want to mess with this, I'll trust you. And if it doesn't work out, like, I'm still going to cash paychecks, and like, you're as invested in this working out for me as I am. And so I imagine that helps. But let's talk Glass now. everybody knew when he came to the Dodgers how good of a pitcher he was going to be when he was pitching. In a weird way, I looked at his numbers today. The strikeout rate is actually down. The ERA is like really good. Not like, I mean, it's better than last year, not as good as 2 years ago. I'm curious for you, but it feels like, I should say this. He feels like an ace. He feels
Oh
like a
yeah,
guy
for sure.
who's game one, take the ball, ability to dominate in a way that only probably 5 to 10 guys in Major League Baseball can on their best days. So I want to get into something that you said about an outing of his a few weeks ago, but just big picture, I'm curious. Have the Dodgers tweaked anything with Glasnow as far as you can tell?
Yeah, the main thing for me, and I actually think I'm going to make a video on this. So I have a YouTube channel as well. If you like what I'm saying, you're not too nerded out by me, go check out my channel, Lance BROZ. It should pop up. But I want to make a video, I think, probably drop within the next week about the Dodgers and the fact that they don't really elevate fastballs a ton relative to the league, which is something that they did with Glasnow. This applies to Yamamoto as well, so that might be blurring the data a little, where Yamamoto's been down in the zone. They kept him down in the zone. They said they're going to keep him down in the zone. So that might be pulling down their average fastball location from right-handed pitchers. But Glasnow, if you look at his plots with the Rays versus right-handed hitters versus the Dodgers, he's actively down more in the zone and away from righties. To me, it feels like a shift. And it might be a byproduct of how Will Smith versus, I think it was like Francisco Mejia or whoever they had set up with the Rays that could be influencing it, just general body position of catcher. But I just think they philosophically believe that a fastball in multiple spots makes more sense from like a pure hitter prep standpoint of like elevation up becomes really predictable. Just again, what I was talking about with Michael King, like he was convinced that like I'm just too predictable if I'm up. So like him and Niebla worked on getting his pitch down, and he still goes up. Like guys always have that in the back of their pocket, which Glasnow does. You split it based on 2 strikes. You see, okay, 2 strikes, he elevates more. When he's not in 2 strikes, he goes more away. Now there's multiple ideas here. Like it might just be being more aggressive. The miss for that, the natural miss for that is going to be more in the zone. So maybe you end up in better leverage counts, which then allow you to elevate or allow you to go to other pitches. It could just be that they like how the slider interacts off the outer third fastball as opposed to the one up. This is like the basic concept of tunneling. I think of tunneling much more in terms of location rather than like ball flight differential. So like fastball up, if you keep the slider in the same spot off the plate, fastball up is going to break the tunnel earlier than fastball away. There's a lot of ideas here that you can mix up on why they're doing that with Glasnow. Perhaps that's a reason why, as you're saying, too, the strikeout rate's down. It's just you're not going to get as much swing and miss away, but the overall byproduct of who he is as a pitcher might be stronger, especially long term. If you can keep hitters off balance of like, okay, first time through, we think he goes away with the 4-seam. And then in this game, in this matchup, late in the year, he happens to go up a ton early. Like I could see that being a piece for them in the playoffs that becomes a really nice advantage too. It's like this guy's 3 pitches to righties, but it's actually 4 because you don't know if the 4 is going up or it's going away. So there's got to be some game planning here going on, I think, with the Dodgers in terms of optimizing Glasnow.
Yeah, and one thing to be clear to people watching this, like, so he's at 11.3 Ks per 9. That would be his lowest mark since 2019. And yet, like, the reason I'm asking, it doesn't feel like that. Like, there's no part of his game where I'm like, man, I don't know. It feels like he should be striking out more guys. But at the same time, like, he has been so efficient that I think part of what you're saying probably lends itself to, maybe the Dodgers saying, hey, we don't need you to strike out 15 guys per game. Like, if you can mix up pitch mix and get the same sort of like actual byproduct results here without throwing 120 pitches and having to feel like you have to strike every single guy out, then maybe that's one of the benefits of kind of this new approach.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. You nailed it.
One thing you said about Glasnow, and this was specific to Glasnow, but it's more of a bigger picture question for me. You said this came from your Substack. Glasnow's release in this particular outing, I believe it's a month ago, was up 2.5 inches in this outing compared to his prior 2 starts. His arm angle went from 53 degrees to 57 degrees. His 4-seam had 2 inches of more glove side movement, and his location was more to his glove side. Mechanics affect ball flight, which affects location. I read this, and of the stuff that I understood the first time I read it, I just read this and I said, his release changed 2.5 inches and went like that feels like a very significant. I mean, 2.5 inches may sound small, but in the grand scheme of like where his arm could potentially be as he's trying to throw a baseball, that feels significant. So is this a normal thing? Like, does release height change that drastically start to start, or was this an abnormality and that's why you were pointing it out?
Yeah, I think it was more an abnormality. I don't have a pure standard deviation on a start-to-start basis of release height. And I imagine even if I did, it wouldn't be too useful because you probably need it on a specific pitcher level. What you generally see actually through the course of career, and this might be me jumping the data, but I think most guys lower their arms as they progress. I think a guy like Logan Webb, he used to be trying to throw four seams up with the higher arm slot. He eventually drops down to a sinker slot much lower, and he becomes a much better pitcher. So I think the reality is, like, on the public side, we don't have a ton of really good info on biomechanics, right? We don't really know how the body's moving too well. All we kind of have is release height and extension. And those are kind of, for the most part, inversely correlated. So as you extend down the mound more, your release is going to go down. You just think about, like, going into a lunge, like, where's your shoulder relative to your lunge? It's like it's going to go lower the more further out you go with the front foot in that lunge. And that is, if you think about it from an arm standpoint, like your arm slot, as you extend more, that drops. But when you have differentials in those, like, say your release goes up, but your extension goes down, like, that's unexpected. It means you're hiking your arm more. I really think that is, like, what I consider, like, more of an output on our side, on the public side, of trying to understand body movement and biomechanics. When I think the inputs there are just other parts of your mechanics. So maybe there was just something different about him on that given day. It was a start against the Twins where he K'd, I think it was 14 or whatever. Like, that start in particular, and maybe there was just something different about his body, like lower half, how he was feeling, how he was moving that given day. And as a result of that, his arm hiked up and he cut everything more than he normally did. That's really what I was trying to get at with all those numbers. Just trying to back it up objectively, was saying, like, hey, his arm was up. It forced him to cut the ball more based on how everything works in his body. I don't know if it was lower body, if it was Q or whatever. It went back to normal the next day or the next start. But in that Twins outing, he was cutting the ball more. And as a result of that, everything kind of moved glove side away relative to his other plots, up away, and he, like, dominated the Twins. So it's like, that's another thing, like an element, I think, of game prep around hitters, right? Like, Twins go in there, they look at his plots, they look at what he does, and they go, this is what we're expecting. And then for the rest of that entire outing, he's not doing exactly what you're expecting, right? That pitch is cutting more, it's away, it's up more. Everything is kind of moving more glove side for him. And I think it goes, I guess, to the onus on the team that you're facing to, like, make the adjustment, if there even is an adjustment. Like, his command was pretty good in that outing too. So I just, like, that's what I was getting at, was, like, mechanics affect ball flight, which affect location, especially for a guy like Glasnow who moves so quick and uses primarily central targets. It's like he's letting everything spray. And it's like, if his mechanics are different on a given day, that ball's going to move to a different spot. And that's going to have a different effect on hitters.
Crazy. I love that breakdown, and it's super helpful. And it's fascinating to think about how, like, it's like maybe his hamstring was slightly tighter and wasn't firing the way, and all of a sudden his extension isn't, it's just the fact that it reminds you of how many moving parts there are in a pitcher and the way that they throw. And, I finished the Clayton Kershaw book, and I keep referencing it on our show, but, like, one of the things that people talk about when they talk about Kershaw was just how unbelievably consistent he was with his mechanics, with the whole process. And I guess as I read some of your stuff, it's like, oh, maybe we kind of take for granted how some of these guys can be unbelievably consistent, because in this case, everything worked out great for Glasnow. Things are cutting more. The Twins weren't expecting it. I'm sure there are plenty of examples of, oh, his extension was a little longer or a little shorter, and because of it, the guy got absolutely shelled because, it wasn't moving enough, or it was moving too much, and so he couldn't throw strikes or whatever it is. It's just a really interesting thing to me that from the outside, from my fan perspective, I don't really think about, which is why people like you, I think, diving into this stuff can be so helpful. I want to shift to just a couple minutes here. The two of the young guys that the Dodgers called up, Gavin Stone, maybe more so. And if you have anything on Landon Knack, but as we record this, Gavin Stone, his last 3 starts, 20 innings pitched, nearly 7 innings per start, 3 earned runs, just 16 base runners, 11 strikeouts. So not a great strikeout rate, but the whip is below 1. The ERA is incredible. We know last year he came up, he struggled. Prior to that, he was a top 100, top 50 prospect in Major League Baseball. So I'm curious, as you've kind of monitored a little bit on the Stone front, is there anything that you've noticed that may be leading you to, that you believe to be explanatory towards the last 3 outings we've seen from him?
Yeah, the changeup's always been good. He's a weird one. He encapsulates why it's sometimes really tough to project prospects, in my opinion, because when we project prospects, I do a prospect ranking on my Substack and stuff, and you're looking at what the guy has done, trying to project going forward. Yeah. The hardest part of that is that so many guys change shapes and mixes and this and that. And it's like, I'm trying to project what the guy will be, say, in his first 6 years of team control or something like that. Yeah. And it's like, all I have is this data right here. And immediately, like, a guy like Stone comes up, immediately struggles, and then they go back down. And then next time you see him, it's like, oh, new sinker, new cutter, throwing both those more, they're ditching the 4-seam. And it's like, prior, he dominated the minor leagues with 4-seam change. So it's like you're looking at him and you're going, oh, I'm going to comp him to so-and-so, a righty four-seam change guy, maybe reverse splits. And it's like, then you see him now and it's like, that's just a completely different pitcher. And even the end of last year, he was throwing a lot of cutter. Like he was 30% plus cutter to righties. And I was like, okay, like that's pretty significant. You know, that's a deviation from the four seam. Maybe they like how he gets out over the plate a little more, staying away from hitters. Sinker goes inside. This season, completely ditched the cutter to righties below 10%, and he's throwing the sinker like 30% of the time plus. And that thing's really eating down in. The adjustment there on the location, I think, was smart by them. I'm not sure what they did, but that pitch was more middle. Now it's more inside. So now you have him going like slider away, sinker in, change up down to righties, and then like cutter up away and like whatever on the four seam, you know? And it's like that is a very different pitcher than like what I remembered him coming up as. And I just think like that is the reason why people miss on prospects a lot. And it's I would argue almost to some extent it's almost the inverse on Stone right now. Like Stone was projected to be top 50. He's clearly not paying off that value. But the Dodgers have salvaged and kind of made him a productive pitcher. And I think their goal is to like mix his way to success. It's just I love guys like that because I love talking about those adjustments, but they're also really frustrating because it's like, man, I remember looking at this guy and like I was 100% confident that was going to be four-seam change for his entire life, you know, and now it's just not. Like he's sinker cutter and like change. And it's like, it's frustrating sometimes from an analysis standpoint. But yeah, I mean, he jumps out. I think their adjustments are smart. We'll see if they stick with the sinker as much as they are to righties. I think it's smart from a pure standpoint of the four-seam was getting touched up against major league hitters. So he's one to monitor. I can't tell you that it's going to continue, but we'll see.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the follow-up I was going to have. So it sounds like with the pitch mix they have now that maybe, is it fair to say like your view of him as a prospect from where he was maybe 2 years ago? Like if you knew that this was the pitch mix and this was the type of pitcher he's going to be, would you have moved him down in your rankings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I thought about that. I think I may have slightly, but I still think I'm trying to formulate like how I think about mix in the minors, especially like Justin Rubelski. I'm probably saying his last name wrong, which is hilarious because my last name's Brozdowski, so we're both Polish. But he's a guy who's like maxed out on his mix. I love him. He's super funky. He's got like no extension, wacky pitcher, plus command. The dude throws 5-6 pitches already. So for him, it's like I can't really imagine them adding anything even as he progresses. But at the same time, like I like where it's at. And like that's the kind of pitcher I see with more high floor, which like he's having success in the minors. His velo is actually above average. Like he's a 94 plus guy. And it's like he's mixing everything. He's not going to Gavin Stone it. Like for him, when he gets up, maybe it's just more usage optimization. It's not, oh my God, he has a brand new pitch. Like he's already got 5 pitches. I don't know what else you'd add. So I'm not sure if I would have downgraded Stone if I knew this what happened. I think I may have, because if you're telling me that he's throwing these 2 brand new pitches, you're implying that like something went wrong, you know? So something about the present evaluation is off. And I'd be like, like that's weird to me. I'd probably maybe scale back my aggression on him if you could let me look into the future, so to speak.
Well, and it sounds like it's interesting because the other name I mentioned, Knack, who's only made 3 starts back down in the minors, but Knack almost feels like as you're describing how you think about Stone now, that to me sounds like, and the pitch mix is slightly different because Stone is so much of a changeup guy, but that almost sounds more like Knack, who's like, he throws kind of a bunch of different stuff, it feels like, but he's not really a strikeout pitcher. He's kind of just, he gets the job done, and you're kind of constantly projecting it like, well, will he continue to get the job done? Versus a guy who has a ton of swing and miss, you feel like you can project that a little further. I don't know if that's a fair comp because that's a way less educated and intelligent way of putting what I'm hearing, but that's kind of like when you're describing the way you feel about Stone, it's kind of like, well, the ceiling has come down, but maybe the floor is still in the same place.
Yeah, that's maybe what to think of with him. You know, like that's again a plus change. I love that pitch. It does great out beautifully well in models, but I think we're getting to the point where we understand that like there's things beyond pure stuff models that are better at projecting change of performance. And his has been nasty. He's got like 40% plus swing and miss on it. It's a good pitch. The main thing that jumps out for me with him is like he's a guy that I think might add a sinker. Like the 4-seam to righties got crushed in the majors, even though he was elevating. Like you look at his plots, very different than what Yamamoto's looks like. He was top of the zone. And there was even instances when that pitch ran a little more inside to righties where he was getting touched. So that's a little concerning to me from just a pure fastball playability standpoint. Like, I think the changeup's good enough for him to not have issues with lefties almost ever and play with the 4-seam. Maybe he adds another kind of in-between cutter slider thing as he goes to cover the inner third. But lefties aren't my concern. It's more about, like, how do you mitigate some of the damage against righties when you're trying to get ahead? And I just imagine there's some kind of sinker in there for him, similar to what they did with Stone. I still think that you can keep forcing usage there because the shape's good enough. It's just where Stone's shape just like wasn't that good. So it was more a matter of like, we got to really protect this pitch. Where on the four seam side, like maybe push it more up away than go sinker in, like, which is a really, really basic concept of just like trying to evolve a pitcher. But yeah, and like in my head, I'm almost expecting that of Knack. So like in my opinion, if I were to like rank and project him, I'd already have that baked in. With Stone back in the day, I didn't really think that was an issue because the four seam was good and the changeup was good. So I was like, maybe he doesn't need a sinker, you know? With Knack, it's like he needs a sinker. I imagine he'll get a sinker. We'll see how that looks. And then I'm gonna bake that in right now. If he doesn't have a sinker, I'd be pretty surprised. But I like Knack. I think he's fine, but I feel like the issue I think you guys run into as an organization is like you just have too many good pitchers, such that the guys that are more like fives don't actually like survive in the Dodgers rotation because like you just have better pitchers. You guys have like River Ryan, and there's a bunch of names that popped up in your minor league system that I've seen the shapes on, and I'm like, that's filthy if you can get it in zone more. So he's just going to get squeezed, I think, over the long term. But he's intriguing, and I imagine he'll find a home somewhere else and be okay.
Yeah, I mean, Frasso's on the IL, Sheehan's on the IL, May is on the IL, Gonsolin's on the IL. So the only reason Knack is like getting some number 6 starter type stuff is because 4 guys on the depth chart ahead of him are all out. And not to mention your point, 12 months from now, right now he might be 10th. 12 months from now, he might be 12th, 13th. Kershaw's on the injured list. I mean, like we could keep going down the list. Buehler just came back. So it's tough sledding for a guy like Landon Knack, who I always joked I probably felt the most confident in what he was going to be in a major league level, but I just knew it wasn't going to be like a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, maybe not even number 4. But I'm like, this guy a year ago could have been the number 4, number 5 in, a third of major league rosters. He just wasn't sniffing anything with the Dodgers.
Yeah, no, it's totally spot on. I mean, I think those changeup guys always have a little higher floors too, because you're never going to have the platoon issue. So like he'll always be fine versus lefties, and then it's now mixing to figure out righties. So we'll see. We'll see if he's a Dodger in 2 years. But I think there's some major league pitcher there. I agree, and it's probably not a 3 or greater.
Yeah. Well, hey, Lance, we appreciate you. You're giving some time to us today. Let people know you mentioned the YouTube channel, Lance Braz, same thing as the Twitter account that we've got on here. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Search my name. It should pop up. I do a lot of Dodger videos occasionally just because they're fun to work. And I mentioned I have one coming out there. My Substack as well. It's on my Twitter if you just search my name. Even if you search my full name in Substack, it might come up on Google. So those are kind of things I'm pushing this year. So we'll see how they do.
I love it. Well, folks, if you want to get smarter about baseball, if you want to get smarter about pitching and want to learn from somebody who knows how to explain it to people like me, Lance is your guy. So make sure you find him on social media, find the Substack, give him a subscription over on the YouTube page as well. I'm excited about that Dodgers video you're talking about. So best of luck the rest of the season, as long as the Cubs aren't playing the Dodgers. And we'll get you back on here soon. Maybe next time we'll just let you talk about Ohtani for a few minutes.
Yeah, let's do it. That sounds great, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining. As always, we appreciate you. This is DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. Enjoy the rest of your day and go Dodgers.